Good afternoon, everybody. First off, thank you for taking time out of what is a sunny day, even though a little chilly here in Jacksonville. Thank you for joining us. I'm Linnell Philman. I'm the president for the League of Women Voters, and I'm just going to do a brief opening, and then I'll join you again later. We ask that while the presentation is going on, you're welcome to leave your video on, but we do ask that everyone stay muted. After our guest speaker finishes her presentation, there will be an opportunity for question and answers. You can use the chat or you can raise your hand, just depending on how engaging the conversation is. We just don't want folks talking over each other, so everyone can be heard and so our guest speaker can answer those questions. So I'm going to turn it over to our Vice President, Rona DiCamillo, and she is going to do the introduction of our guest speaker. So Rona?
Wonderful. Thank you, Linnell. So it is so fun that we are doing a Zoom meeting for our December luncheon so that we can have Rosemary Heilemann, who has been the leader at the League of Women Voters on the abolition of the Electoral College. Rosemary is a retired teacher who has been a member of the League of Women Voters up in Illinois for 45 years. She serves on the board of her local league and is active in other levels of league, including her county league and the Illinois League state committees. She's also served in off-board roles for different ILOs up in Illinois, the League of Women Voters Lake Michigan region, and the League of Women Voter Upper Mississippi River ILO. She's been the moderator for candidate forums throughout the area, chaired studies, and acts as Zoom host for many meetings and webinars. So back in 2017, she co-founded a league committee whose goal was to educate the public about why we should abolish the Electoral College by constitutional amendment. At that time, I was actually up in Illinois and was a member of an adjacent league to the League of Women Voters Deerfield, Lincolnshire, which is Rosemary's home league. One of our league members actually became very active in this committee, and I recall going to our local library at some point early in this process to hear this, one of the original presentations on abolishing the Electoral College. So I feel like this is kind of coming full circle for me. The League of Women Voters Electoral College Committee has been giving presentations since 2017 around Illinois, as well as to other leagues. So it's great that Rosemary is here with our league today to do this. In June of 2022, League of Women Voters US identified the abolition of the Electoral College by constitutional amendment as its next big goal, or moonshot as they sometimes refer to it. And this committee has been very engaged with League of Women Voters US in being a resource for that national campaign. Rosemary is also a member of her local Rotary Club, the Woods and Wetlands Group for the Illinois Sierra Club, and has particular interest in water quality and improving the safety of freight train transportation of hazardous materials. So Rosemary, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm looking forward to giving you this presentation. So let me share the opening slide here. And there we go. All right. So the first thing I wanted to mention was that on your registration, it made it look like I was going to talk about the national popular vote, when the terminology we use for our presentation about a constitutional amendment, we say, well, direct popular vote, to distinguish, because there are two approaches going on in the National League at the same time. And if you remember your history about the suffragists, you'll remember that one group was working state to state, and then Alice Paul was tying herself to the front gates of the White House, which was a national approach. So there are two different approaches going on, and our presentation is about a constitutional amendment. The groups that are working on increasing the number of states that have adopted the national popular vote are also working under the League's umbrella. So we're both working together. Illinois adopted the national popular vote in 2008. So when we formed our committee in 2017, there was no need for us to do anything with that. The league had never been involved in our state with the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It was passed rather quickly, introduced by Republicans in Illinois. So Illinois never got involved with that effort. And so we've been concentrating on a constitutional amendment and have been working with LWVUS, as Rona mentioned. And this presentation I'm going to give to you is one of the 2 official LWVUS presentations that you can find on their website. And it is scripted for a reason, because we want people all over, we want league members all over the country to be giving this presentation. And Rona says that she's already given it once herself. I said, why didn't you give it today? And she said, well, we wanted a new voice. It's nice to have a different face on the screen. But what we're hoping to do, and what our committee does, and we meet every month, the 3rd Friday of the month, and we've been training people to give the presentation, and whatever they need, whatever help, to give them the confidence, and providing them background information so that they can feel comfortable answering questions. So I'm going to start the actual scripted presentation that you too can do. So let's get going. The opening slide. Welcome to our presentation on abolishing the Electoral College. This is a critical issue for our country, and this presentation will give you the reasons why the League of Women Voters supports a direct popular vote to elect our president and vice president. We'll start by sharing the basics. What is the Electoral College? What is the League of Women Voters' position on this method of electing our president? Next, we'll show the problems caused by the Electoral College, problems that a direct popular vote would easily solve. Then we'll review the top arguments given in favor of the Electoral College system and why each of those reasons are actually based on common myths. Finally, we'll explain what needs to be done to abolish the Electoral College, which is ultimately an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and what you can do now to help make that happen. And we'll do this with plenty of time left to answer your questions. So please jot them down as you go, and we can answer them at the end. First of all, the Electoral College isn't a school or a building or a place. It's a group of 538 people who elect the president and vice president of the United States every 4 years. According to the U.S. Constitution, each state legislature gets to decide how their electors will be chosen. And I'm going to veer off of the script for a minute here, because there are 3 less known features of the Electoral College that I like to emphasize. It's not so much in the script. But this idea that the state legislature gets to decide how their electors will be chosen is the basis of the compact philosophy, in that the state legislatures can decide. So many people don't realize this. In the early years of our country, as the states were gradually going over to a winner-take-all system, some of them used a system where they divided into districts, and several states continued to use the state legislature to choose the electors and not even ask the people for a vote. The state of South Carolina did not offer the vote for president to its residents until after the Civil War. And there's one episode that intrigued me. In 1812, the state of New Jersey had gone to a winner-take-all with a popular vote, and the people voted. But 2 weeks before the national election, they had a state election and their legislature turned over. It was a new party now in power, and they decided they didn't want to take a chance on letting the people vote. So 2 weeks before the federal election, the state of New Jersey said, no, we're not going to let the people vote after all. We're going to take back that choice, and the state legislature will choose the electors. So, and there are 2 states, as you know, Nebraska and Maine, that don't use a winner-take-all system, and one of them was adopted in the 70s and one was adopted in the 90s. So state legislatures still have complete control over how the electors will be chosen. And recently, this came up in North Carolina because of the hurricanes. And there was a proposal that they cancel the presidential elections because there was so much disruption due to the hurricane, and just have the legislature choose the electors. Because there was a new Electoral Count Act bipartisan reform that was enacted in 2022, they were not able to do that by federal law because they had already started their early voting. If they had not already started their early voting, if they had done this a month before, North Carolina could have said, no, we're not going to have a vote. We're just going to choose the electors for the people. And in fact, if it had happened before the Reform Act of the Electoral Count Act, which was in 2022, if this happened in 2020, they could have used the hurricane as a force majeure argument for canceling the presidential elections. So that's one of the less known features. If you know about the compact, you know that the state legislatures can choose the electors, but many people don't realize how the other ramifications of that aspect. So back to the script. That's one of my little side trips. So at the beginning of our country, state legislatures just picked the electors themselves. Over time, states started choosing electors by popular vote within their state. Each political party has their own slate of electors. When you vote in November, you are not voting directly for a presidential candidate. You are voting for a group of state electors from the candidate's political party who have pledged to give their electoral votes to that candidate. And in past years, in some states, they actually listed all the names of the electors. I don't think too many states do that anymore. Now, each state gets a specific number of electors based on their congressional delegation. One elector for each U.S. senator and each U.S. representative. For example, Texas had 38 electoral votes in 2020, while Rhode Island had 4. The District of Columbia, though not a state, gets 3 electors. Importantly, the winner of the Electoral College is not whoever gets the most electoral votes. That would be a plurality. The winner must have a majority of the votes, over 50% of the votes to win. Currently, that's 270 electoral votes to win. If no candidate gets 270 votes, the U.S. House of Representatives chooses the president, with each state having just 1 vote, and the Senate chooses the vice president. So this is another one of my little side trips. So this is the second less known feature of the Electoral College system. If there were a strong third-party candidate, and this came up in 1968 when George Wallace actually won some electoral votes and was hoping to get enough to force the election into the House of Representatives. If there's a third party, or if there's a tie in this last election, people were thinking it would be much closer than it was, and they were saying there was a possibility of a tie, 269 to 269. In that case, the House of Representatives gets to choose from the top 3 candidates who will be the president, and each state gets 1 vote. So all 50-something, whatever, 53 representatives of California have to get together and come up with 1 vote. All 17 representatives in Illinois have to get together and come up with 1 vote. That guy in Wyoming gets 1 vote. So it's an extremely undemocratic system for choosing the president, where each of the states, regardless of their size or population, has exactly the same say. And the other feature is that the Senate chooses the vice president from the top 2 vote getters also. But they could, in that case, the senators each get 1 vote. It is entirely possible for the Senate to choose a vice president of a different party than the House has chosen for the president. And that's still in the Constitution, and that could happen. They were afraid that was going to happen at this last election. Since 1970, the League's position has been that the direct popular vote method for electing the president and vice president is essential to representative government. The League of Women Voters believes, therefore, that the Electoral College should be abolished. The rest of this presentation will explain the many problems with the Electoral College that the League has identified. You may not have heard about some of these problems, but there are also some that you may have heard a little bit about. The League also supports the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact as one acceptable way to achieve the goal of the direct popular vote for election of the president until the abolition of the Electoral College is accomplished. This was added in 2010, and the League supports the National Popular Vote Compact, hoping that maybe this would be a little easier way than an amendment. So it's on a state-by-state basis, and the League is working with the committee to promote the adoption of the compact in enough states for it to take effect. So you've had this presentation, and you know that there need to be enough states signed on to the compact to equal 270 before it goes into effect. So I won't give you any more detail about it because you have had these presentations, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end. All right, so let's jump into what's wrong with the Electoral College and how a direct popular vote for president will solve each and every one of these problems. To start, we're going back to the very beginning, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, during the long, hot summer of 1787. This was just after the American rebels won independence from England, and the newborn country needed a national constitution to determine how it would be governed. Each of the original 13 states could send delegates to represent them at the Constitutional Convention. 55 delegates attended, representing 12 of the 13 original states. Notably, Rhode Island refused to come because they were afraid that they would be locked out because they're so small. And Rona, because I'm sharing, I can't admit, so there's someone there that needs to be admitted. If you can hit that. There you go. Okay. So that, and I'll tell you why that's kind of crucial with Rhode Island. The delegates included many famous men, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. These men faced the task of creating a new national system of government, and there were many fierce debates and arguments. Remember, these are the leaders of their local colonies. These are educated men. They're all prominent, and they all had very strong opinions. How to elect the president was one of the first arguments to arise, and it was the last one to be resolved through a compromise that ultimately came to be called the Electoral College. So why was the Electoral College created? Well, one big reason is slavery. The Electoral College was a compromise designed to give the Southern states more voting power in presidential elections based on counting each enslaved person as 3/5 of a free person. This 3/5 compromise had already been used to increase the number of representatives given to Southern states in the U.S. House of Representatives. Because the Electoral College is based in part on the number of members that each state has in Congress, it carried this infamous math into presidential elections. So when they were discussing the House of Representatives, the small states were very upset with the idea that it would only be a proportional representative system. And they were pushing for what turned out to be the Senate eventually, where each state had equal representation. And they, along with Rhode Island, were threatening to not be part of the Union and that they would go join with France and go under the French banner. So they actually initiated this kind of a blackmail, you'd say. And so to solve that problem, the two different houses were established, the one with representation and the other with equal senators for each state. So now when they're talking about representation, the slave states were afraid that they wouldn't have the power that they wanted. And so they insisted on, they wanted to have all their slaves, their enslaved people, counted for the number of representatives that they would get in Congress. And the states that were opposed to that, didn't want them to have so much power, finally came up with the 3/5 compromise. Okay, so now it's the end of the convention. They've been there all summer. It's hot. They've been arguing. They want to get back to their businesses, to their farms, to their law practices. They've been there from May to September. And then they have to start the work of getting the Constitution adopted in each state because they had to have it ratified also by 3/4 of the states. So out of just, I think, exhaustion, they finally agreed to use the system we have where they have each state has the same number of electors as they have representatives in Congress, plus 2 for each senator, which was a way to use the compromises they had already come to allow to set up the Electoral College. This rift between the North, back to the script, the rift between the North and South was not because there were more people living in the northern states than in the southern states. In fact, as you can see on this chart, in the northern and southern states had essentially the same total population in the 1700s, about 1.8 million each. However, the southern states had a much smaller voting population than the northern states because over a third of the southern states' population was enslaved. As a result, the southern states adamantly refused a direct popular vote for president. Before the convention, everyone expected there would be battles between the smaller versus the larger populations. But as Madison wrote about halfway through the convention, it seems now to be pretty well understood that the real difference of interests lies not between the large and small, but between the northern and southern states. The institution of slavery and its consequences formed the line of discrimination. If the racism of the Electoral College had ended when slavery ended, we might not be having this conversation. But the Electoral College continued to silence Black votes after the Civil War. Right after the Civil War, there was a brief period called Reconstruction, when federal troops were stationed in the South to enforce the newly won civil rights of formerly enslaved Americans. During Reconstruction, Black men voted and the first Black representatives served in Congress. But then came the election of 1876, which was just a mess. Records are a bit murky, but it's pretty clear that Samuel J. Tilden won the popular vote for president over Rutherford B. Hayes. However, there were allegations of voter fraud, and in 4 states, Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Oregon, both sides claimed victory. They claimed victory by sending 2 sets of lists of electors with their votes. Does that sound familiar? As a result, Tilden did not get a majority in the Electoral College. And they didn't know how to interpret those 4 states' votes. They didn't know which ones to choose. So the 2 parties came up with a compromise that traded the newly awarded rights of Black people to shore up the malfunctioning Electoral College. I'll veer off. They created a commission. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution that talks about a commission, but they did it. And the Chief Justice was chairman of this commission, and it had representatives from both houses. And they came up with this solution kind of on their own to resolve an emergency situation. So it just was done, period. The compromise allowed Hayes to become president in exchange for the removal of federal troops from the last states where they were in the South. The states of the former Confederacy were once again allowed to rule themselves, and they quickly started passing a series of laws commonly known as Jim Crow laws. During the Jim Crow era, the voting rights of Black people were systematically destroyed by state laws and local ordinances, like poll taxes and literacy tests. The Jim Crow era lasted for almost 100 years, until the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the Electoral College was created because of slavery, and the failure of the Electoral College in 1876 allowed racism to flourish. Unfortunately, the racist impact of the Electoral College didn't end with the Voting Rights Act. The Electoral College continues to suppress the voice of Black Americans. That's because states with a higher percentage of Black residents tend to have less power in the Electoral College, while states with whiter populations tend to have more power. For this analysis, Electoral College power is defined as the number of people it takes within a state for each electoral vote. If it takes fewer people to make up one electoral vote, the electoral power is stronger. For example, in the chart on the left, in states that are more than 85% white, it's about 400,000 people per electoral vote. And we're going to show more of this on the next slide, but basically what causes this disparity is those two extra senators. So if you take, let's say, I forget if California has 53 or 54, but let's say 53 representatives. And so you divide up all the voters are going to get 53 electors. And now you throw in, 12 million voters. And now you throw in two more to represent the senators. Well, those 12 or 15 million voters, instead of 53 electors, they get 55 electors. It's not going to make that much of an impact when you divide it up. But in Wyoming, where the whole population is only 600,000, and they get one representative in Congress, now you throw in two more senators. Now you've got 600,000 divided by 3 is 200,000 apiece. It's because of the senators. The two extra is what causes this. Plus, actually, the House is not equally divided anyway. That's another topic. For example, in the chart on the left, in states that are more than 85% white, it's about 400,000 people per electoral vote. But in states that are more than 15% black, higher than the national average, it's almost 650,000 people per electoral vote. If you do the math, that means it takes 1.6 votes in states with high black populations to equal 1 vote in states with higher white populations. This is a simple analysis based on the 2020 census. However, a more sophisticated statistical analysis done by William Black from the University of Maryland in 2019 came to the same conclusion. His analysis of every election from 2000 on indicates the Electoral College has consistently awarded more votes per capita to states with whiter populations. Again, the Electoral College may not be trying to mute black votes, but it is having that impact simply because of how our black and white populations are distributed across the states. Perhaps this will naturally reduce over time, but a direct popular vote would immediately eliminate this racist impact by making every voter count as one vote, regardless of race or any other demographic. A lot of people these days are not aware of the racism that's been a part of the Electoral College from the beginning, yet they are aware of other issues within the system. So what do most people dislike about the Electoral College? The problem we hear most from people is that the Electoral College turns losers into winners. 5 times in our history, the Electoral College has awarded the presidency to candidates who lost the popular vote. This happened 3 times in the 1800s and twice in this century, in 2016 and 2000. A direct popular vote for president would ensure that the candidate who gets the most votes from the people would actually become president. And of course, that's what the compact is all about, as an effort to do it state by state instead of doing it across the whole country with an amendment. Another problem, and this is what I was talking about before, the balance. Another problem is that the Electoral College violates the principle of one person, one vote. It makes some votes count more than others, depending on where the voter lives. That's because the number of electoral votes given to a state isn't exactly proportional to its population. No matter how many people live in a state, it gets 2 electoral votes based on its 2 senators. So voters from smaller states have their votes weighted more heavily in the Electoral College than votes from larger states. For example, you can see in the table on the left that 1 vote in Wyoming counts as much as almost 4 votes in Florida. Wyoming has 3 electoral votes, or 1 electoral vote for every 192,000 people. Florida is a bigger state and has 29 electoral votes. That's 1 electoral vote for every 743,000 people in Florida. So if you do the math, in the Electoral College, it takes nearly 4 popular votes in Florida to equal 1 popular vote in Wyoming. This plays out in other small and large matchups like Wyoming, Vermont, or Alaska, whose electoral votes count as much as 3 or 4 votes in states like Florida, Texas, and California. A fundamental principle of the United States is that one person has one vote. This is the standard for every other election in this country, and it should be one person, one vote in our presidential elections. And that's exactly how it would be in a direct popular vote for president. Now, all of that information is great, but you know what? Most of it doesn't matter because of this next slide. Regardless of how votes are weighted, if they're unbalanced, whatever it is, we all know by now that only a few states really matter in the presidential elections. I don't know, but in Illinois, it's kind of demoralizing to have your state called for a candidate within 15 minutes of the polls closing in your state, because it's just assumed that Illinois is going to go blue and so on and so forth. It's really demoralizing. We heard about this is me, in this election reporting, we heard about swing states from the minute they started reporting the elections. That's all they talked about. These are the so-called swing states, back to the script, where the outcome of the vote is considered to be up for grabs. So it can change from election to election, depending on how close the election will be in that state. The rest of the states are considered, quote, safe states, where the feeling is that the election result is obvious. The map here shows the swing states from the 2020 election. The top 6 swing states are in dark purple: Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Then there were another 7 swing states shown in lighter purple that were, less of a worry. Together, these swing states got almost all the TV ads and campaign events. In fact, 100% of the TV ads and 98% of campaign events for 2020 general election presidential campaigns were in these swing states. They get all of the candidates' attention, and even worse, that means they have much greater influence over candidates' policy positions. With direct election by popular vote, candidates would be forced to pay attention to the whole country, not just a handful of swing states. All 50 states and the District of Columbia would require consideration from presidential candidates. The Electoral College not only makes some votes matter more than others, it gives people a reason not to vote. It actually decreases voter turnout in so-called safe states. Now, I've been in the League of Women Voters for a long time, and you all know that this is the League's #1 presence to the people, is that we want people to vote. And if you're in a state, in Illinois here, if you want to vote for a Republican or a third-party candidate, it's demoralizing. You figure, well, why bother? Illinois will probably go Democratic anyway. And if you want to vote for a Democratic candidate in Illinois, you figure, well, it'll probably go Democratic without me, so why bother to vote? Now, I have a story. When I was a teenager in Illinois, so this is a long time ago, my teenagers, one of the news stations for a while was allotting a minute at the end of the 10 o'clock news for people from the community to speak on whatever topic of the day they wanted to talk about. But there had to be the opposite point of view the second night, so that because they had the fairness doctrine in those days. So it was kind of interesting. You'd see different points of view on different topics. So one night, the League of Women Voters came on in their minute. They wanted everyone to please go out and vote. This is very important. Make your voice heard. And I clearly remember turning to my sister and I said, well, how are they going to find someone on the other side of that? Sure enough, the next night, I don't know if he was real or just fake, but they had a guy on who said he was an anarchist. And he said, don't vote, you're supporting the government, this will never work. So from those early days, I knew that the most important thing that the League had to say to people was get out and vote. But this system demoralizes that and disincentivizes people to vote for president. And then that cynicism carries down to the other races down on that ballot, on that year's ballot, and really all elections. It doesn't matter what I say, my vote doesn't count, blah, blah, blah. So data from 2016 and back to the script, 2020 prove this. In the graph, you can see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in what we call safe states compared to the swing states. These differences may seem small, only 6 or 7 percentage points, but that translates to 15 million registered voters in non-swing states who chose not to vote in 2016 and 22 million registered voters who chose not to vote in 2020. That's more than enough to change the outcome of a presidential election. This is a nonpartisan issue affecting both major political parties. Here it's the same thing I just said. If I'm a Republican voter in a blue state or a Democratic voter in a red state, I feel like my vote for president never counts. So why bother? On the flip side, Republican voters in red states and Democratic voters in blue states feel like their party doesn't really need their vote. So millions of people just don't vote. A direct popular vote for president will increase voter turnout by making every vote count and count equally. And as we saw during the 2020 election and its aftermath, the Electoral College also leaves our presidential elections more vulnerable to manipulation and even outright fraud. The Electoral College provides partisan operatives with a roadmap for overturning election results. In 2020, that created a desire to, quote, find an additional 38 electoral votes instead of over 3.5 million votes if the winner were chosen by popular vote. And the Electoral College showed where it would be easiest to gain those electoral votes by finding fewer than 43,000 ballots in just 3 states, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. That's all it would have taken to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. So those are 6 major problems with the Electoral College, and each of them would be fixed by using a direct popular vote to elect the president. You may be convinced, but not everybody is. You know, I tell people, yeah, we know well, I'll tell you this later. We're not going to convince everyone. But after outlining all of these problems with the Electoral College, we hear from some folks who say, well, even if this is all true, here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through the most common reasons why some people continue to support the Electoral College. These are not just fringe theories, by the way. These are the main points that supporters of the Electoral College use to defend this undemocratic system. And none of them stand up under scrutiny. They are actually myths that do not stand up to the facts. So let's bust some of those myths now. Myth number 1. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by a couple of big states like California and New York. This is the most common one we hear. The fact is, in 2020, Joe Biden needed votes from at least the 31 highest population states to beat Donald Trump's 74.2 million votes. Here's a chart of the votes for Joe Biden in 2020, listed by states going from the highest population state, California. Let's start out with the first 10 largest states: California, Texas, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan, biggest population states. And you add up all the votes that are possible, and yes, and you will see that Joe Biden only came up to 44 million, and he had to beat 74 million. So now, let's see, where am I in the text here? Far short from needing to win. Add the Biden votes from the next 15 largest states. So you go all the way down and you go down to Massachusetts, go over here to Tennessee and Maryland and down to South Carolina, down to Louisiana. And in Louisiana, he still only had 69.5 million votes, and he had to get to over 74.2. So it went all the way down to Iowa, number 31, the 31st state, the 31st largest state. Everything below Iowa has smaller population, before he finally got 74.5 million votes, which would have made him have more votes than Donald Trump. And in fact, Biden received 81 million votes, so he got additional votes from the remaining 19 states plus DC. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest states. The fact is that direct election by popular vote means that votes from most or all states would be necessary to win the presidency. And every vote would count and count the same, no matter where the voter lives. And myth number 2 follows along the same way. After seeing these facts about states, believers in the Electoral College will then bring up a similar myth, that without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by just a few big cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Once again, statistics tell a different story. These pie charts show the percentage of voting age adults who live in big cities. As seen on the first chart on the left, the combined voting age population of New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago is just 5% of the national voting age population. That's certainly not enough to decide an election. So we expanded to the top 10 cities, those with over 1 million residents, and that adds up to just 8% of the voting age population. Even when we went to the 50 biggest cities, they make up just 15% of the voting age population in this country. That's about the same as the size of the rural population. There just aren't enough people living in big cities to decide our president on our own. Most people, 71% in this country, live in smaller towns and suburban areas. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest states or the largest cities. Once again, direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented regardless of where they live. Myth number 3. Abolishing the Electoral College will only benefit Democratic candidates. To bust this myth, let's look at the 2004 presidential election, the Bush-Kerry election. On the left is the Electoral College, the actual Electoral College map for the 2004 election, where George W. Bush won over John Kerry with 3 million more votes than Kerry. But the map on the right shows how close George Bush came to winning the popular vote but losing the electoral vote. Can you spot the difference? It's just one state, Ohio. If John Kerry had received only 119,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have won Ohio's electoral votes, he would have won the Electoral College and the election for president, even though Bush would still have had 3 million more popular votes. That was a near miss for the Republicans. So this can impact either party. It is a nonpartisan issue. Perhaps the biggest obstacle to eliminating the Electoral College is just plain pessimism. Many people feel that the Electoral College will never be abolished because it would take a constitutional amendment to do it permanently. Now, again, we've talked about the compact is a great interim step, and some states are interested in it and have adopted it, and there are people that support it, but it is not permanent. And the permanent, more permanent solution is a constitutional amendment. And that would make it the law of the land, not just the laws of certain states. It's never going to happen is a comment we hear all too often from our friends. I tell people we know some people will never be convinced, and then we have a middle number of people that we hope we can convince that this is important. But even our friends who think it should be abolished have this defeatist attitude that you can't achieve a constitutional amendment. So what we need to do is to defeat defeatism. Here's a timeline showing the dates of all, back to the script, of all constitutional amendments and when they were ratified. The Bill of Rights is shown with just one bar. You can see that our history includes flurries of constitutional activity punctuated by long periods of inactivity. There was a period of 60 years between the first two clumps, then another gap of 43 years. There were 18 years between the amendments of the 1930s and those of the 1950s and 60s. Then a gap of 21 years to the 27th Amendment in 1992. It's been 30 years since then. What distinguishes these periods of constitutional activity? Well, they tended to be periods of great national political activity, where citizens were feeling that our democracy was in crisis, where the demand for change across our society was persistent and loud. There was the period after the Civil War, the progressive era at the turn of the last century, and the civil rights era in the 1950s and 60s. We seem to be in the middle of another period of political activity, of demand for change. Only time will tell, but the level of engagement we are seeing now and the genuine concerns about the resilience of our democracy are remarkable. So let's focus on our goal, abolishing the Electoral College by amending the U.S. Constitution. What will it take to get there? Our ultimate goal is a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College and use a direct popular vote to elect our president. This is how we amend the Constitution. First, a bill to propose an amendment needs to pass both the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate by a 2/3 vote. That's called a joint resolution, and it can start in either house. That's not easy, nor should it be. Then the proposed amendment needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. That's 38 states. Again, not easy, but it's been done 27 times. We can do it again. Please note that it doesn't require, and we're not talking about a constitutional convention. That's a whole separate thing. The usual amendment process that we've outlined here that's been used for all the other amendments would do the job of abolishing the Electoral College. So what actions have there been? Congress took action between 1969 and 1970 to abolish the Electoral College. There was a ton of momentum at that time because in the 1968 election, a third-party candidate, George Wallace, got 46 votes in the Electoral College. Both Democrats and Republicans were worried that Wallace's popularity could have resulted with neither Richard Nixon nor Hubert Humphrey getting the required 270 votes in the Electoral College to win the election. A Gallup poll at that time shows a whopping 81% of Americans supported abolishing the Electoral College. And a bill to amend the Constitution passed the House of Representatives by a huge bipartisan margin, 338 to 70. However, the bill died in the Senate when it was filibustered by Southern Democrats and joined, by the way, by Northern New York Democrats, who feared that their states would lose power in presidential elections because of their traditionally low voter turnout in the southern states. Similar bills have been introduced as recently as 2021, but there has been no vote on these bills. We believe this issue lacks momentum because of the defeatist attitude. It's never going to happen. So that's what's got to change. We need momentum. The League of Women Voters is uniquely positioned to empower voters through education and advocacy at the local, state, and national levels. This is what we do. We engage with voters, provide them with the information and education they need about elections and issues, and then armed with this education, the League can activate voters to bring momentum to Congress when the time is right. So I'm going to pause on this moment of when the time is right. you and I know that at the moment, imagining that a joint resolution to abolish the Electoral College would get through both houses of this coming Congress is not very likely. However, and this is my take on it, things happen suddenly and in emergencies in this country. So, for example, if, as was considered a possibility in this last election, if there were a tie or a third-party candidate that disrupted the Electoral College count where it went into the House of Representatives, most people would not know about that, would not understand it, and they'd be like, what? How can that be? This can't be. And what we're hoping is by educating the public, by having leagues all over the country, giving this talk to small groups, large groups, Rotary groups, libraries, political parties, league groups, if something like that were to happen, maybe in the next election, or even if they're talking about it, because they were talking about it for this election, but most people didn't know it's called a contingent election when it goes in the House. But if people were well educated, they would say, oh, yeah, I remember that lady was talking about that. Now I know what that is. And there, the dream is there would be a groundswell of demand of the representatives of both parties to eliminate the Electoral College system. Another thing is, let's say North Carolina, suppose they had, if the new Electoral Count Reform Act had not come into effect in 2022, if they were still under the previous Electoral Count Act, North Carolina could have canceled the presidential election in that state. And so then again, people are saying, what? How can you do that? Blah, 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 blah. And would say, yeah, oh yeah, I remember that lady from the league said that the state legislatures have control over the, So if the people, our goal now is not lobbying, our goal is educating the public and having people talk about it. And the other thing that I complain about is that, I've been interested, how's my time? I've been interested in this topic for a long time. And the main thing is that over the years, nobody would talk about the Electoral College as soon as the election was over. And then after the 2016 election, all of a sudden people were talking about it. So now we were able to persuade the National League through our committee to take this position out of the dusty old pages of our position book and bring it to the forefront because it's finally part of the conversation. But it should be part of the conversation for all people. So what do we do now? I hope you're totally convinced that we need to abolish the Electoral College so that the person who gets the most votes wins our presidential elections. Let's start with the easiest thing. Just talk about it. Tell your family and friends what you heard today about the harm that the Electoral College is doing to our country. Feel free to use your own words or use our crib sheet. I'm going to send Rona some handouts that we used at convention, and one of them has sample talking points that we'll make available to you for ideas. Your goal is to tell at least 3 people, but more is even better. At our first presentation, my girlfriend Carol brought her sister-in-law Diane, and I made a big deal out of everybody talking about keeping it as a conversation. And Carol said, then they had their Christmas dinner, big family dinner, and there was a lull in the conversation, and Diane, following what I asked her to do, piped up, so what about that Electoral College? It was like this stunned reaction. Another thing you can do is to post on social media about the League's One Person, One Vote campaign. You can make up your own posts if you're good at that, but you can also download posts at the League's website, lwv.org/OPOV. That stands for One Person, One Vote. And finally, you can arrange to give this presentation to other groups. If you're a member of the League of Women Voters, you can give it yourself. The presentation and script are available to all League members, and our committee, which now has 23 states that are sending representatives to our monthly meetings, will make it easy for you. We will provide you with materials, training, and support you need. Just email us at abolishelectoral@gmail.com. If you're not a League member, maybe you should be, you can email us at abolishelectoral@gmail.com, and we'll find a League member to give this presentation to your group. That's it. 3 easy things you can do now to spread the word that we need to abolish the Electoral College and elect our president by popular vote. Thank you. Sorry, it went a little long. I get down those side comments and I get carried away.
No, we so appreciate the side comments, and I really did just want to follow up on the North Carolina piece. I had not heard that there was that discussion in North Carolina, so it was stopped only because we passed the Electoral College Reform Act.
It's called the Electoral Count.
The Electoral Count Act. Yeah.
Reform Act, yeah, of 2022. Yeah. Because
wow, I had not heard that was, because of the impact of the hurricane, that was something they were considering.
Yeah. All right. Should I call on the people, or do you want to that have their hands raised, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat. So folks, if you have any questions for Rosemary, please raise your hand.
I see Brenda has her hand up.
Go for it, Brenda.
And before that, Linnell pointed out Florida does list you still do list the electors for each political party on the Division of Elections website, but it's not on the ballot.
That's right.
Right, Linnell?
Not on the ballot. We have the presidential candidates on our ballot, but you can find who the electors are if you go looking.
Oh yeah, you can find them. Brenda, what's your question?
Yeah, I hadn't heard the presentation about the National Popular Vote Compact. Where can I get information about that?
Well, I'm going to send Rona 4 handouts, and one of them has the exact text of the handout, and it has some links in it, since you'll be sending it electronically to their website. But if you go to their the official name is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and they have a robust website. I think they'll send you the free book. It's 1,000 pages long, and it's full of a lot of the same information I've given you. But they just have this other approach to how to do it. Do you want to know how it works? I can tell you how it works. All right.
Unless other people will be bored with that.
I'll try to do it quick. So we know now it takes 270 currently. If DC were added as a state, that number would change. But currently, it's 270 electoral votes to elect the president. So if you look at the 2016 election as an example, where Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the electoral vote. So because the state legislature can choose the electors, they write a bill, like in Illinois adopted it, that if the popular vote is different than the electoral vote, if they need to switch the electors from their state, they will do so by the agreement. So let's take an easier one. This election, Donald Trump easily won the electoral vote and the popular vote. But if the compact were in effect and we're working right now, if there were enough states in it, even though it wouldn't make a difference, because Donald Trump won the popular vote, Illinois would have to authorize its Republican electors, even though the state of Illinois voted blue. But their agreement, this gentleman's agreement, is that so when they fill out that form, even though Illinois voted blue, since Donald Trump won the popular vote, Illinois would have had to agree to fill out the form with the Republican electors and send the 19 Illinois electoral votes to Trump. So on the map, Illinois would have looked red. Yes.
I'm missing something. You said Illinois voted blue, but Trump won the electoral. Help me with that.
All right. So this last election, Trump both won the popular and the electoral, right?
On a national level.
On the national level. He won the popular vote across the country, and he won the electoral. But if the compact were in effect, even though it wouldn't make a difference, the Illinois legislature and whoever authorizes those votes that go to Congress would have to authorize the Republican electors, because Illinois signed this agreement that they would send the electors that match the national popular vote of the whole country. So even though people in Illinois voted blue, they would have to send their Republican electors' votes to Congress to be counted. Now, where this would matter, let's go back to 2016. And that's why people, feel this is a good system. So let's say there were enough states in 2016 to have the compact in effect. And let's suppose Wisconsin, which, in 2008 was more liberal than it was in 2016. Suppose Wisconsin was one of the early signers also, and enough other states. Okay, so now here comes the Clinton-Trump election. Clinton has won the popular vote, and Trump has won the electoral vote. So every member of this agreement has agreed to authorize the electors for whoever has won the whole national popular vote, which was Clinton. So Wisconsin now, which had signed this agreement back in 2008, Governor Walker would have to say to the people of Wisconsin, I know you think you voted for Trump, but we signed this agreement 10 years ago, so I have to authorize the Clinton electors. And it would have given the election to Clinton if all the states in the agreement followed through on their word. So that's how it works.
Yeah. Just to add a little color specific to Florida, Brenda, Florida has not adopted the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. There is an active group here in Florida, Floridians for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, but we have a state House representative who introduces it every legislative session and is planning on introducing it in the spring legislative session, but it never makes it any further than introduction here in Florida. Rosemary, Linnell had asked in the chat, is the league going to be updating your slides to reflect the outcome of the 2024 general election? Are there lessons to be learned from that election that can be incorporated?
Well, I have to brag, our committee, I told you we've been meeting every month since 2017. And as we've gone to different national conventions, and since Zoom became big during COVID, there's always some good outcome of every terrible thing. We've had people from numerous states who sign on every month, and it changes, month to month. So we had the committee that put together this slide presentation for national, and then they took it and they just did the graphics. So they had given us some, consideration on how to do it. So we just updated that slide with the states that shows the numbers of the votes, because we had a bar graph before that was kind of hard to explain. And so we need to submit it to national to see if they will agree to make that change. So it's not national, it's like, we're still developing that relationship. Rommel Sandino has been hired to be the national organizer for the One Person, One Vote campaign. And he has a committee of about 4 people, and they're under Alma Couverty in the organizing department. And then the compact people are under Jessica Jones-Caparel, who's the advocacy person at US. So we're working with Rommel, and I will tell you honestly, I'm 77 years old. I want national eventually to take over our committee, our monthly calls, take our videos, take our materials, and let it be a national. But Rommel and his group are actually more organizers. And so we're hoping that in the next year that they might hire some content people and, really start combining what our committee's been doing with training people and providing content and providing speakers, and include that and have that be LWVUS doing that. And then they would, if they want to make changes. The data for that 2020 election really wasn't published until 2022 by the Federal Election Commission. It takes a couple of years for all the charts to be put together and to be made public. Yes, that's that chart. The one with the bar graph was the Obama election. So already this is an update from 2012. So we were happy, and we haven't gotten that approved yet. We just submitted this recently. So sure, we want to keep it up as much as possible.
Yeah, and maybe a good question to end on. Linnell asked, how do interested persons join your monthly call? And I would encourage anyone who is interested in this to do that. Every month, Rosemary sends out, they record the presentations. They have fabulous speakers who speak on very specific parts of the Electoral College abolition process or about the Electoral College. And all of those videos are available to folks who join in. So if this is something you're interested, those monthly calls are fascinating. There've been some really great speakers that I've heard through those monthly calls. So Rosemary, what?
Thank you. Well, and currently it's just my email lists. I have, I send it out right from my computer. So it's abolishElectoral@gmail.com. And I send out 500, and lately we've gone from about 25 to 70 people that show up. So you are not expected to show up. You don't have to RSVP. You'll get the information. We send out the links to the videos every month because they're not public. They're unlisted. And sometimes, one time we had a speaker that had to change the date. He wasn't available in September. He could come in October, and I wasn't able to get a speaker for September. And I thought, well, should I cancel? And this was, the convention had just been in June. So we had a big influx of like 250 additional people since June. And I thought, well, I'll still call a meeting, and whoever shows up, we'll talk about whatever they want to check in about. And we had 30 people from 10 different states, and they were talking about different questions they had in their state, and they were getting advice from each other. So it's not always a speaker. And then sometimes we have set aside that time to do training. So one time, early this year, we got some of our old-time committee members who had been given the presentation, and we called them the mentors. And then we recruited some people who really wanted to give the presentation, but wanted a little feedback and someone to help them. And so we had them come on this one date. We went into breakout rooms. It really took some finagling. I got mentors to match the personalities of the people that were needing to be trained. And so they had, up to two, one, as long as they needed, up to 2 hours to go through the presentation, ask questions, get help, and so forth. And so that was a nice training session that was just for those people that were ready to do that, and everybody else got a month off. So I would love to see as many of you as would like to come. No obligation, but you'll get all the information.
All right, Rosemary, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's still an ad hoc committee of the Deerfield Lincolnshire League, and we have a representative from US that comes occasionally, but she doesn't always come, and they sort of trust us, I guess, not to do anything horrible. So it's still this ad hoc committee of my local league, but we've got people from all over the country coming, so it's really been very gratifying and nice.
Well, Rosemary, thank you so much for Zooming in with the League of Women Voters Jacksonville First Coast. We certainly appreciated your deep knowledge on this topic, and we look forward to doing our part to educate folks here in Northeast Florida about the how to get rid of this old institution.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Linnell, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, Rosemary. Thank you so much. And I can appreciate you putting your age out there. And I'll tell you what, there are women who don't have their cameras on right now, and some of them who do, which I consider legislative goddesses, that are, kind of silver haired, but they are knowledgeable, and they've been carrying the ball for change in our state and in this country. just like you, and I appreciate you very much. So thank you for joining us today.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Yes. We're going to move into some announcements. If you give me just a moment to share my screen, we'll try to keep this brief. I do realize that this has been a great investment of time today. So I appreciate everybody joining us. And as always, I have everything ready to click on, and then I can't find it. All right, hopefully you can see my screen.
We can.
Very good. So just some announcements. I hope you've seen some emails about developing our committees that will support the work of our local program. These are the topics of our local program established by our members and approved by our members. So these are things that we found of interest to us that we were willing to invest our time and energy in. And so we're going to have some meetings to establish these particular committees to lift this work up. Right now, we don't have any elections on the horizon in 2025. That doesn't mean that someone won't resign or get terminated. That happens here in the state of Florida, unfortunately, at all levels of government. You know, we could lose someone another way. But so these are the dates of our committee development meetings. One this Saturday at 10:15, one on the 14th at 2:15 in the afternoon. Those will be at the Mandarin Library on Corey Road. And then on December 18th at 6 p.m., that will be via Zoom. So the goal is to have folks who have signed up for different committee work to be in the room and to discuss some of the things that are actually listed in the local program. I'll have copies of that available on site, as well as the State of Florida's study and action booklet for each committee. I'll have that for you. Zoom, it'll be a little bit more challenging, but we're going to give you the information in advance so that you can start looking over that. But the goal is to start identifying work that we can do that is actionable that's listed in the local program so we can lift that work up. If you did not sign up for a committee yet, you can still do so. That has been sent out, I think, 3 times to you. And if you need to have it sent again, let me know and I'll be happy to forward it to you. We do want you to know that in advance of the legislative session, which starts in March, we have county delegation meetings. I want to thank you, Rona. Rona went up to Nassau County and spoke on behalf of the league. I spoke at the Duval County delegation meeting, and these are the 2 that are upcoming. While Rona and I are the only 2 who will actually be speaking on behalf of the league at the county delegation meetings, I think you're going to cover St. John's, I hope, Rona, in January, and I'll be going out to Clay County to represent the league. Anyone can actually sign up in advance and attend these meetings. There is a requirement to submit a speaker request, and please know that the legislators who chair these meetings have not done the public announcement with the speaker request forms yet, so keep an eye out for that. But anyone can go and talk in front of the legislators and tell them what's important to you and things that you would like to see them work on here in the state of Florida. And again, Ron and I will be doing that on behalf of the league. The legislative session, as I said, starts in March, but prior to that, they do a lot of work. They were actually in Tallahassee just about a week and a half ago, our newly elected and re-elected representatives getting their committee assignments. Those have not all been made yet. Some of them are on the public websites, but not all are listed yet. But these are the dates that your legislators will be in Tallahassee. If anybody knows how this works, on the first day of session, it's like, where did all these bills come from and how are they moving so fast? And that's because a lot of the work is done during the interim committee meetings. So these are open to the public for anyone who would like to go to Tallahassee and meet with your legislator there or attend the meetings. But we encourage you to meet with your legislators here at home. Please know that I am working on the contact sheets for all the legislators across our 4 counties, and those will be made available to you, our members. So you will be able to find time to meet with your legislator here at home in their district offices, or call and talk to their staff or email them. Session starts March 4th. That will be the first day that they introduce bills. And then May 2nd will be sign or die, or the last day of legislation. It's 60 days. For anybody who's done this here in the state of Florida knows, you're going to start seeing action alerts probably just in the first 5 to 10 days. And that is, again, because those bills have already had a lot of work done on them during the interim committee meetings. So if you are not already receiving emails from the state, it's comms@lwvfl.org. We put that out in a lot of communications to you. We'll be putting it out at the committee meetings again. But you really do need to be able to see those action alerts so you can decide what's of value to you. And we ask our members to respond when you receive those. So before we get ready for a session, the League of Women Voters decides what our priorities are. While we have a lot of priorities, we decide that the top 4 actually get a lot of the time and energy of our lobbying firm that we've hired, as well as our strike team. That's our group of leaders that are in Tallahassee to go back and forth to meet with different legislators, but to also speak in the Senate and House chambers on behalf of the League. But if you would like to help us establish what our priorities are for the League of Women Voters for the 2025 legislative session, there are 2 listening sessions. One will take place this evening at 5 p.m. The other one will take place on December 9th, next Monday at noon. Those are held via Zoom. Registration is required. And you should have actually seen that. Now that's been sent out 3 different times by the state of Florida if you're getting the communications from them. But you're also going to get a communications from us here locally that will help us rank the legislative priorities, and then we'll respond back to the state of Florida with what we think the priorities should be. So this is an opportunity for every member across the state of Florida to weigh in and be heard, or to listen to other members as they talk about their concerns. And these meetings are both recorded, so you can access them later if you're not able to attend live, just so you can hear what was discussed. And lobby days. Some people call it tally days in other organizations. We do call it lobby days. That will take place for the League of Women Voters on March 11th and 12th. We'll be staying at the 4 Point Sheridan. It starts around 11 or noon on the 11th and will end late in the evening on the 12th. It's an opportunity to hear some lobby training, learn how to use some lobbying techniques. We'll have some in-depth discussion about the priorities that we're going to be talking to legislators about. We'll be meeting with legislators in between House and Senate hearings. And then we also have a gala or an awards ceremony where we recognize the work of legislators or other folks, and it's called the Defender of Democracy. So it's a nice time to go meet other League members, meet our leaders from across the state, our action chairs, our co-presidents, our board members, and also to learn a lot more about the League and the work that it does across the state of Florida. And just a reminder, in June of 2025, we will be holding elections for our local chapter. What will be on the ballot will be 2 positions of our executive committee. Our vice president, Rona, has indicated that she would like to stay on, which I'm very excited about. Also, our treasurer, Hattie, is going to step back. We have 3 elected director positions. And I apologize, I did not update this slide, but 2 of them are non-specific issues. I don't want anybody to think that you have to take up the work of the environmental director, as Angela DeMondren, our 12-year board member, steps back. But there will be 2 director positions, and then we are looking for someone possibly to take on the role of voter registration director. If you're interested in any of that, you're welcome to reach out to us or Paige Gottlieb, who I believe is on this call. And she recently sent a direct email out to all of our members. So if you're interested in something or have questions, please reach out to Paige. We'll also be looking for 3 nominating committee members. Those are just 1-year terms. And those will be the folks who help us select the new board positions for the following year. And then there's also an opportunity to serve as an appointed board member. Those are 1-year terms. Right now we have a director of technology, that's Deb Miller. She's going to be stepping back, and I think Chase Jones is going to fill that role for us. But there's also the reproductive health and justice. Wendy Snee serves as an appointed director, and I'm not sure about her intentions to stay or not, but we can have up to 5 appointed board members, so that that's of something of interest to you. Reach out to the board, because those are appointed by the board members and not elected by the membership. And then this is where you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and email with the League of Women Voters. And I'm going to condense my screen now just in case we have any questions. I do see something in the chat. Oh, that was just from Brenda. Okay, very good. And she had to jump off. I'm glad she was able to join us. But are there any questions about anything that's coming up on our radar in the immediate future here? I will say this, and we've had about 28 people sign up for different aspects of the local program committee work, and I appreciate you for that. It's a lot of work for a small group of people to do. So we do hope that if you haven't signed up for something that you will do so. And if you're not able to join us for the 3 meetings that we have scheduled in December, we hope you'll indicate your interest so that you can join us at a future date. We are going to be returning to Seasons 52 in January, and it has totally slipped my mind. I think we're going to hear from City Councilman Jimmy Peluso, if I'm not mistaken, is going to talk to us about the community programs that came along with the stadium deal. So that's going to be interesting. And then we have some other good stuff lined up for you in February, March, and April. So with that, I'll ask Rona if she has any comments or anything she'd like to add.
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
All right. If you haven't heard me say this before, I do try to remember this is an all-volunteer organization, and absolutely nothing happens without each of you. So I appreciate the work that you've done in the past, and I appreciate the work that you'll help us do in 2025. It's going to be a challenging time. There are a lot of things that are going on, not just here in the state of Florida, but across the nation that don't align with the position of the League of Women Voters. And I know it seems like the deck is stacked sometimes, but please know this, there are a lot of people who care about this nation, and there are a lot of people who care about their neighbors. So y'all, we are still in this together, and there's a lot of work to be done. So I look forward to doing it with you in 2025. So have a great afternoon.
Thank you.